Okay, we are live here on YouTube. What's going on, YouTube? We got Mr. Rob Vega in the house. What's going on, Rob?
Yo, mic check 1 2 3. How's it sound?
Mic check. We also have Mr. Scottie Johnson from Excess Power. Scottie, can you say hello to everybody?
Hey guys, what's going on? Happy to be here.
Cool. You guys give us a little bit of feedback if you don't mind in the chat room here. Let us know she can hear us okay. Audio sounds good to me. Rick says we sound good. So in that case, we are going to go ahead and get started. And Rob, since you were out last week, you're going to have to do the intro today.
All right, man, I could do it.
All
I'm
right.
gonna try to do. I'm gonna do it in my Australian accent. Is that fun?
Craig would be impressed if you would do it in your Australian accent. I
No,
think.
I didn't practice it before, but I will do it at some point. I'll
All
do
right.
my Craig accent.
All right. It's all you.
All right, 5, 4, 3. Welcome to 12 Volt Talk, episode 48. It's me, your boy, High Five Vega, joined as always by my good buddy Derek from Williston Audio and a special guest, Scottie from Excess Power. What's up, D?
What's going on, Vega? You were gone last week. Left me here all alone with some Australian dude.
Yeah. Some might say it's the better version of me.
I don't know. We did get a lot of super chats last week, so I'm
Yeah,
not
I've
sure
seen
what's up
that.
with that. But we won't. You still get your share, but I think Craig wants some too, so we'll have to hook him up. But no, we have a special guest tonight. We're really excited about Scottie Johnson from Excess Power. Scottie, what's going on, man?
Not much. Thank you guys for having me on here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us. Those who don't know, Scottie is super busy with Excess Power, super busy with family stuff. I just greatly appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule here to join us so that we can get deep into some questions. And we're speaking of that, we're going to go ahead and get right on and get started because we don't want to waste any time. So first off,
All right.
tell us about how you got started in car audio. Tell us about your first real system.
Oh man, that's a stretch way back, all the way to like 1995 or six, probably. I guess my first real introduction to it was my older brother. He kind of he was a pretty serious Iasca sound quality competitor. He's a half brother of mine, so I didn't really realize I had this whole interest in my family. My dad was big time interested in trucks. He had a mud bog vehicle, big engines and stuff like that. So that kind of had my interest peaked into cars in general. But my brother, once that he came into my life and I realized, okay, I have an older brother I didn't even know I have. And he does this whole car stereo thing. This is crazy. I've never seen it. So the first time I sat in his car, I was like addicted. I was super young and impressionable. And I was like, I want to be a part of this. I don't really know much about any of it, but I'm going to learn whatever I can. And his Eclipse at the time, it had two or three, I think, Punch 150 Rockford amplifiers and some Boston acoustic 10-inch subwoofers, and of course all the Boston. That was the latest and greatest in components back at that time, and he had it all. It was very immaculately laid out. And so that kind of led me into. At the time, he had also introduced me into the world of woodworking. So he kind of started on a whim and said, "I'm gonna build kitchen cabinets for a living." He went from the restaurant business to the kitchen cabinet business. It's a pretty far departure, but he jumped into that with both feet, and I started helping him out. And I was at the time, in college and learning how to use tools and stuff. Anyway, so I got my both feet just jumped right into building subwoofer enclosures for myself and kids around town. And first thing I built was I believe it was like a 1985 S10 Blazer. It was the one with like barely a 2-liter motor. So after I put all the weight in it, it would barely pull itself. But I ended up putting 8 12s and 4 10s in that, and that was all Rockford equipment as well. I think they were the punch drivers. I'm not sure if that's right, but so long ago. And then he let me borrow one of his spare competition Punch 150 amplifiers. So I'm powering 812s and 410s off of a single 150 watt amplifier. Um, so yeah, I didn't really know what I was doing back then. They were all mixed matched ohm load. Some would play a lot louder than others. I didn't really know why, but eventually I came across a really good deal on I think it was an Alpine 300 watt amplifier, and I put that in there in addition to the Rockford amp, and it made a huge difference. I was in my town by far the loudest guy around, so a lot of people started telling me, "Hey, you need to start taking this thing to car audio competitions," and I didn't even know that sort of thing existed. So my next car was a Honda Accord, and we talked about in the intro a little bit about that. But at that time, I never even put anything in the trunk. I went wide open, full tilt. I just went straight to 12-inch subs in the back seat and some Soundstream amplifiers. And that was a pretty serious build. I took that to competition for probably 3 years straight. And I didn't realize what all was about to happen, but that opened a bunch of doors, people in the industry, and kind of started the process of me realizing kind of what sponsorships were all about. And I met some really cool people from, the car audio elite, some people that I know really well now. And I just was meeting them for the first time back then in like 98 and 99. So that's pretty cool to think back about that stuff.
So you say you're part of the network.
I think I am. I feel like.
Yes. I think we got our Letterman's jackets. We're trying to get in. We're almost in there.
There you go.
You touched on the Accord. Can you tell us a little bit more about the setup and what equipment you had in there?
Yeah, that like I said, I jumped right in, and I didn't really know much about ported enclosures back then. So the way I fit it all in there was, well, first of all, was I chose a subwoofer that didn't need a lot of volume. So at that time, Soundstream had just released their Mule subwoofer, and they marketed it specifically for people who wanted really small sealed enclosures. So I was thinking, man, I could stuff a bunch of those in here if I only have to have like 3/4 of a cube, And back then, lots of the subs were taking massive amounts of airspace. So that's where I started, and then I had to try to figure out power after that. And by this time, I'm probably like sophomore year into college, and I realized there was this thing called financial assistance that could give me a couple $1,000s of extra spending money every year or every semester. So I just waited until my next financial aid check came around, and I ended up buying for some weird reason, I started with my highs amplifier first, and I bought a Soundstream 5.0 and saved up a little bit more, and I got a 10.0, and eventually I got three 10.0s total, and I laid them out in a really nice configuration in there, and I just wasn't totally satisfied with the volume I was getting out of it. I was still, the first couple of events I went to, I was putting up some pretty good scores, but back at that time, scores were measured on the Linear X, and if I had to compare that initial system by today's standards, I mean, there are probably guys out there with 210s that register a higher SPL score, but to me, it was incredibly loud. So for some reason, I think just to get a better impedance match and to get more powers to the subs, I ended up swapping those 10.0s for the later Rubicon 1002 model that they came out with, and I powered it all by Alpine. I was completely addicted to everything Alpine. I had a CVA 1000 to start, the original flip out screen that they offered. I still have it to this day, actually. I just spotted it in the middle of a bunch of collection of junk that most people would say. So I still have that, and I had a 12-disc changer that went with it. And then probably my favorite piece in that whole build was the Rockford symmetry. I love that thing. It gave me so much flexibility that I wasn't really used to at the time. And, remember, I was still like incredibly novice level at the time, but that piece to me just seemed like it was so far in the future. I loved it. But that's pretty much it. I mean, I can't forget the batteries. I started out with Stinger batteries in there, had an incredibly small amount. If you guys have pictures of it, you might know better than I do, but I believe it was at first like 3 of the little 925 models. So I was trying to power like 3,000 watts off 3 of those little batteries. And then eventually I put, I think, 6 in the back and 1 in the factory location. So 7 of those little 25 amp hour roughly batteries. And back then, Stinger was the first one on the market with a dry cell battery. I mean, Optima was around at the time, but for the power those things made and the size of them was, for somebody like me that was just learning about all this new stuff, I was like so amazed by those things. I'm still a fan of them today. I don't have any of those left still, but that's pretty much the gist of the system. I think cable wise, I just used like leftovers from whatever my brother had laying around at the time. Eventually, I scored a pretty substantial sponsorship with Tsunami Metro brand at the time, but that was pretty much it. There was a lot of other things with the vehicle. Obviously, I had like a full body kit on it, and I painted it in like a pearl, like with a bunch of ghost graphics in it that you really couldn't necessarily see in pictures. But man, I thought I was cool back then.
Yeah, that's a great story. The thing that gets me though is you started with Rockford. It sounds like,
Yeah.
and then see, in my mind, Rockford, Orion, and Soundstream were like 3 huge competitors back then. You kind of had to pick sides. It's kind of funny to hear somebody say they went from Rockford to Soundstream, because usually that's like going from the rock system to the kind of yuppie type. Because Soundstream to me was kind of more
Right.
like less SPL, more SQ
Yeah.
type.
Right. Right. Well, there's a perfectly good explanation for that. Mainly, my brother is the one that was a huge Rockford fanatic. Like, he got me addicted to all of their early products. I eventually ended up acquiring some other products, like I think like the egg-shaped amplifiers, the 200s or something like that, maybe Punch 200 or something. And I would collect the stuff back in the day, and I would try to sell them for profit to people that would come to me with stereo assistants. They would be like, I want something loud like you have. And I would try to gather from the used market equipment like that and put it together in a customer's build, But my brother was the one that really exposed me to all that. So it was really all I knew. And then when I went to college, it was in the next town in Bowling Green. It was one city away from mine. And I just kind of became a regular at the stereo shop there. I would go there between classes and hang out because I was addicted. I didn't have anything else to do. I didn't care to go study at the library. So I would go study car audio. And I got to know the guys there. And apparently whoever the rep was for Soundstream at that time really sold this store. They sold them hard. And I fell for everything they had to offer, hook, line, and sinker. I mean, they had the exact 12s or exact subwoofer line at the time for sound quality. And I convinced my brother to buy some of that, my younger brother to buy some of that stuff. And everything they came out with, I liked it more and more. And I kind of started sliding a little bit further and further away from what Rockford had to offer. I think part of me did it because Rockford was everywhere. Everybody knew what it was. But when you talked about Soundstream at the time in my small town, people didn't really, it was all new to them. So if I pulled up to a parking lot to show off what I had, and I had the same Punch 150 that every other guy had, it wasn't anything special. But when I came with this flashy chrome amp that nobody ever seen before, it was the reaction that I got from it was better. So I kind of stepped that direction for a little while, and eventually I got to meet, I don't remember any of these guys' names now, but people from Soundstream, the actual factory at the time. And honestly, I think they're one of the ones that initially made the contact so that I had a person to talk to at Auto Sound and Security magazine, because they were running some advertisements around that time. And to me, that was just like the holy grail, to be included in just a tiny little picture in a magazine. I wouldn't have imagined that a few years to come, I would actually have a feature in there, like a full feature. But yeah, the guys that I met with, they had in Atlanta somewhere like a Soundstream regional gathering. It was at a place like a Dave and Buster's. I can't remember if that's actually what it was, but it was a arcade for adults, basically. And I mean, they gave me literally, like you were saying earlier, like a Letterman jacket. They gave me a Soundstream jacket. I was like, it is official. I'm here, you know. And then after that, I got a sponsorship from them for more product. And it's kind of a bonehead thing that I did then. They asked me what I needed, and I thought, well, I really just need more power. So I'm prepared for World Finals that year by doubling the amount of amplifiers I had in my car. But because the impedance wasn't very flexible, I ended up with the same exact amount of power I already had. So I didn't gain anything. And I look back on that sometimes and I'm like, oh, that was stupid. I should have just changed subs. Could have got a lot more power from what I already had. But anyway, it was part of the experience.
Well, we live and we learn. You kind of have to do that. So
Yeah.
one of the things I want to step back real quick is, you talked about using some of your student loans to purchase gear. We talked with Wayne Harris a few months ago, and he maxed out all of his credit cards to buy his stereo system. So I'm not saying this is what everybody needs to do, but I'm just saying it can work out for you.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on how driven you are, to see it through. And it was a for real addiction. And I look back at that and I think, is that my personality? I could have been like addicted to drugs or something, but instead I chose to blow all my money on that. And, some of my close friends, they poke at my past because some of them were around back then and they saw how I lived. And it's like, every pair of clothes I had was ripped and had holes in it because I wouldn't buy new clothes. I wouldn't buy new shoes. After I moved out when I was 18, I chose the most affordable method of living so that I could afford my car audio addiction. I lived in a super tiny single wide mobile home, and eventually it ran down to the point where weeds were growing inside the mobile home. Like the floor had rotted out, and my friends are like, you need to reconsider your lifestyle here. Trophies were taking up 2 of the whole entire bedrooms where they weren't even usable because I had so many event trophies. But I did the same. I racked my credit cards to the limit. And back then there weren't as many credit card regulations to keep you from really hanging yourself with debt. And every time I went back to school for another semester, there would be the, Discover and Visa and all these people set up with these tables propped up offering you credit cards, and they're like, you can get $1,000 right now. And I'm like, sign me up. I need another amp. So I racked up, I can't remember the exact amount, but I racked up a lot. And eventually, we can come back, but fast forward several years to the retirement phase of my competition career, I had assumed a large enough mass of equipment that most of which I had been provided to me under full sponsorship for, all the hard work I'd put in competitions and helping market the company's brands. But I eventually, when I was done, got to sell that equipment, and every penny that I made from it went right towards that debt. And I ended up not only covering my college tuition debt from that, but also covering my fiance at the time. I covered her college debt with it too. So, all of the labor and time and effort, I've never got a penny out of that. It just was an education, basically. But the equipment, I finally was able to collect enough of it and meet the terms of my sponsorships enough where I could sell the product. And finally was able to get out from underneath that huge amount built up.
I know it could add up quick. So
It
you
did.
talked about the competition stuff, and did you ever do SQ, or was it all SPL from the beginning? Just SPL, SPL, SPL.
It was all SPL, and that's your comment earlier about Soundstream was typically perceived more of an SQ, and at the time Rockford was probably stronger in SPL, but that wasn't specifically the way my mind worked. I didn't kind of put that together back then. I wanted to go with the equipment that I wanted to go with, and I think part of it, in retrospect, is my brother was the sound quality guy, and he did what he did, and I didn't really have, once he introduced me to it, I realized my attraction to it was the bass. It wasn't, how good can I make this sound, because probably his hearing is a lot more selective than mine, maybe, but I just didn't. I didn't care so much for that. Now I did end up building probably 10 or 15 sound quality type installs. I just never built something and entered it personally myself. I would build something for somebody that requested they wanted to go and take it and do some sound quality or combination of SQ and SPL competition. And some of those people entered and did fairly well, but nothing on like a national level. Probably the closest involvement I've ever had on a national sound quality level is helping a buddy of mine, Coy Hudnall. He's big time into old school car stereo. He collects tons and tons of Alpine equipment, and at the he was building what would eventually become like a 3 year in a row USAC sound quality champion vehicle between him and his brother. And I got the opportunity to actually build the enclosure for those. He finished them out and made them look like what they look like. But as far as the actual wood shell part of it, I got to do that. It was really the only involvement that I had. And, we would be at a lot of the same events like World Finals together. And I would kind of sit and enjoy some of the excitement of what it would be like to compete in sound quality. But I just didn't have the patience to build one on my own. I just wanted to see how loud I could get it.
That's cool. I didn't realize you and him were close like that. He ran the sound stream because I did some had some footage of his that we did in a previous video where he showed off his what do you have, an IROC or a Camaro, something
Yep.
where he had the Solo Barrack 12s in the back and he had the Soundstream amps.
Yeah,
all
that's
the
the
way out.
enclosure.
Yeah,
That's the
that
enclosure I built.
super super sweet build. Uh,
Yeah, Coy.
yeah, he's
Coy actually is uh, partly responsible for my existence in Knoxville. I mean, the reason that he had some of the same equipment is because we frequented the same stereo shop. That's how I know Coy. Back when I was in college, he was the stereo shop that I went to. He was the home audio installer there. He installed home audio, and I kind of got to know him a little bit. And then when he moved off and got a job working for Powermaster, when they got, this is jumping way ahead, but when they decided that they wanted to get into the battery business, um, I was who he recommended to Powermaster to hire to be the engineer for that. So that's, if it wasn't for him speaking up during a company meeting about me, I may not have ever got into the battery industry, period. So I'm really grateful that he took the time to think, hey, that guy's doing some crazy stuff with batteries. Maybe he can do this job and I can get my buddy in here and have somebody to hang out with.
Yeah,
So I actually moved in with him for 2 months when I first moved to Knoxville. So pretty close.
speaking of the batteries, what's up with I hear about you cutting into cells and taking the 2-volt cells and making your own 16-volt batteries. How did that start, and what made you want to do that?
Um, I guess just like with anything else, it's kind of it's a progression more than anything. I mean, I started out when I went to the next vehicle and first built a van for competition. I kept adding to the little Stinger battery collection that I had, and I think I ended up, I don't know, with maybe 20 of them at one point, and it just wasn't quite enough capacity for what I needed. And I probably would have continued to add more and more, but again, I was trying to get by with what I could get by with in the next to no income that I had. So I'd reached out to Stinger and I'd met with the owners at the time at like spring break or something and tried to get more battery support, but that was asking a lot of a company like that back in the day. I mean, to provide cable, which was incredibly inexpensive at that time compared to what it would cost to do the batteries, was two different stories altogether. So I wasn't able to really get what I needed. So I started looking into alternatives, and another guy from the industry you guys probably know is Dominic Aragi. He was competing in some of the Mecca competitions at the same time I was, and I perceived him as a really high level of intellect. I still do. I still consider myself good friends with Dominic, and he at the time taught me a lot of things I didn't know about amplifiers and subs and just stuff in general because I was still really green at the time. And he happened to have some stuff that he had collected from another job he was doing or something, but there were some nickel cadmium, sort of like a lead acid battery, but just giant NiCad batteries that were like, some of them were very odd voltages, 1.3 volts for some of them and 2.2 volts for some of the others. So he was like, I mean, these things are huge and they're not very powerful, but you can take some with you if you want and play with them. So I kind of just started combining them. At the time, TurboStart was already in existence and they made 16-volt batteries, and the guy representing TurboStart at the time had already come onto the scene strong, and there were a few large competitors that had massive banks of them in their carts. So I knew the higher voltage was going to be a massive benefit. I just couldn't afford to do that. I had no option other than to try to finagle something together. So I tried adding some of these individual cells together, and it was making an improvement. So, a tenth is a tenth in my book. So I had a van that had tons of space in it that I wasn't using all of at the time. So I just piled a bunch of those freebie cells in there along with whatever batteries I had at the time. And I noticed some improvement. And eventually I kind of learned the game of requesting sponsorships a little bit better. So I ended up getting in touch with somebody that I could establish a relationship with at Optima, and I got batteries from them. And I was like, okay, well, I already know 12 volts is not going to get me what I need to remain competitive. So I'm going to need to still use these. I'm just going to have to hide them somehow. So I would prepare my system so that when I went, I would talk all Optima and nobody knew I had, other 2-volt or 1.3 volt cells like stuffed back in there. The judges knew, obviously, because they had to test for voltage to make sure you're legal, and they would always act like their meter was broken. Like, what? This says 17 volts. But so I ran that way for a little while, and eventually those things took up too much space, and I started thinking a little bit further into it. And this wasn't with Optima's permission or anything like that, but I just thought, these individual cells with an Optima battery, it's a little more clear to see it. But I was like, okay, this is a 12-volt battery, so each one of these cells is 2 volts roughly. So if I were just able to get like part of another Optima battery and add it to the ones that are already there, the capacity would be matched, and it would be a much more efficient system than I was using, because that setup I just described that I had was horribly mismatched. I probably ended up having, something like 300 amp hours of 12-volt power and then maybe 100 amp hours of the 2-volt power. So the mismatch didn't make it very efficient. So I just decided one day I'm going to just see what happens if I can just kind of cut one up and try to build my own 16-volt battery. And this was a little bit further down the road with my relationship with Optima, but at that time they had just released the bigger Group 31 battery that had the offset cells. And I thought, okay, this will be the easier one to use because I can use that offset space to stagger cells together. And I made my first pair basically. So I took, the setup was every cell was used, but it was an odd setup. So if you took a 6-cell battery and you took 2 cells and dedicated it to another 12-volt battery, you would have 8 cells total. Well, then you would still have 4 cells left over. So I would take another battery and build it the same way that I did by separating those 2 cells. And now I would have 2 8-volt batteries that I could tie together. And over here, I would have a 16-volt battery, an actual 8-cell battery. So I just configured all of those different um, packs, basically, to where the whole entire system would work as a 16-volt battery. And it worked. It worked great. It worked far beyond my expectation. I actually had very low expectations because even back then I knew that if you cut apart a lead acid battery and you allow the oxygen to escape, or you allow oxygen its way in, the life of the battery just wouldn't be there. But I also expected that the power wouldn't be there either, but every bit of the power of the individual cells was all there. So I had more power than I even knew what to do with in terms of battery power. So then it was time to start finding ways to get more amplifier power and then subs to handle it. But I did find out eventually that the lifespan was about 6 months maximum for that cobbled together battery system. So to take that big of a bank of batteries and cut them all up and do that, you would end up with 2/3 of your whole entire bank would eventually die off, and then you would still have the 12-volt batteries that didn't get cut into, that they were still fine, So every so often I would have to go back to Optima and request more batteries. And there was a time at which I'm sure they thought, how are you going through so many batteries? And I'm thinking, okay, well, I need to be upfront with them and say, this is how I'm doing what I'm doing. And they were totally cool with it. They didn't care whatsoever that I was doing what I had to do to win, as long as I was representing the brand. So it was a fun learning experience that helped me get to that next level in competition where I could compete with all the guys running 16 volts.
That's an awesome story. So that kind of transitions, because man, we can sit here and talk all night, but we have a limited amount of time, so we're going to try to condense some of this down just a little bit. But right now, you guys have a website, and I'm going to share my screen here for those who are watching. It's DIYcentralshop.com.
Right.
And I guess if you could explain, this kind of goes back to, you being a DIY guy and you kind of want to support the people who are in the DIY. And I notice you guys offer lithium cells now and stuff like that. What's the idea of, or I guess, what's your thought about, you guys are an established battery company that sells to multiple markets, and you're offering these things as a DIY. I'm kind of wondering how that fits into, what you see this going into the future, like how you guys are going to move forward with this.
Well, I mean, if you guys have been watching it, the DIY community has grown, and it fits. When I say DIY community, I'm specifically talking about the DIY battery community, because, just by nature, guys who buy car stereo equipment, a lot of them have a DIY mindset. I can totally relate to that customer. And normally we wouldn't, as like you said, as a company that has a full dealer network, we wouldn't necessarily be able to service a market like this without jeopardizing our existing dealer network or upsetting people. But one thing I noticed by offering the loose capacitors is usually we only sold those to either DIY guys direct. They wouldn't go through a dealer, because the mindset of a guy who builds things on their own, the days of a guy like that going to an audio shop and buying something they're over. You don't really see that anymore, because obviously the internet is where a lot of people buy things they need these days. So, when I realized we're selling a lot of loose capacitors to SPL competition people and not dealers, when they see it on the price sheet, they're like, I don't know what this is really. And of course, we could have gone out and done a lot of training to teach people how to use them. But even then, if a dealer puts a loose bank of caps or a loose bank of lithium in a customer's car who doesn't really understand what it is or know how to use it, they're probably not going to have a pleasant experience at the end of the day. So what actually allowed us to be able to do it is, first of all, having items available that the DIY community can use. So the first thing obviously was the loose capacitors. And you've probably noticed on our website and on our dealers' websites, the cap banks are still there. So the super capacitor SB series product is still available. It's there. Dealers buy it all the time, and they plug it up in a customer's car, and there rarely are ever any questions or issues with that product because it installs essentially just like a capacitor or a battery would. So having the product available was kind of the first step. And the LTO cells that we have, we've actually been using those. Actually, we started a relationship at the end of 2016, early 2017. And it's a really good commercial product for us. So we sell, notice one of your questions was the markets that we sell to. Audio is a significant part of our business. It's not necessarily the biggest. It depends on what's going on at the time and which month it is. But sometimes car audio sales will lead. Sometimes racing sales will lead. Sometimes it'll be commercial, industrial, or marine, or some other market. We're getting into power sports a lot right now too, but it's not grown to the point yet where it would be a leading revenue stream for us, but that's coming eventually. So the cells that you have pictured on screen right there, we use for commercial and industrial applications quite a lot. And they work really well for that because they're, in terms of energy density, they're not the highest you can get, but they're incredibly reliable and incredibly safe. So there's a lot of chemistries we could choose when we're picking a lithium offering for something a customer's requesting us to make for them. And if we can provide a product that will not come back and satisfy their power needs, that's our number one priority. Price also sometimes is a priority, and sometimes it's at any cost. It just depends on what the customer, what their top priority is. So once I keep an eye on things like the DIY market, and not just in car audio, but in the racing market and marine. If I see trends that would have an impact on our business or overall impact in the battery industry, then I'll pay attention to it. So I've been paying attention to these DIY forums growing and growing and growing. And a lot of times people ask me questions about the things they see in there. So I'm kind of connected to it anyway. And as I saw the popularity of these particular cells growing, I'm thinking, man, I keep these in stock anyway. I can continue to sell them in the way that I sell them to commercial, industrial, and marine customers, and at the same time offer that inventory at an equivalent or fair price to what they're paying for them now, and also treat it as kind of a supplement to Team Excess Power, because one of the really time-consuming things that we go through at our office is both race and car audio guys looking for help or sponsorships or something like that for big competition builds. With the way we've structured this site, competition guys can just go on there and buy them at the price that's posted. There's no need for any back and forth negotiation. That the price you see there is the price if you buy one or you buy 500. It doesn't matter. It's essentially us passing that item along at a near cost price, that there's a little bit of enough margin built in there that the proceeds that we gather from the DIY store, we're using to fund our ability to go to events, to continue to support World Finals, to continue to support shows like Slamology, because at the end of the day, the trend will likely be 5 years from now, most of the competitors you see at a show like Slamology will have a battery bank that they have put together themselves, the same way that they put their own enclosure together, or the same way they built their own, door panel or whatever else they build. So it's a way for us to give back to the audio DIY community, but to also stay relevant long term in that community. Because if 5 years from now everybody's using some cell they took out of an EV vehicle or some Chinese product like this, then Excess Power is no longer present in those vehicles, and we would have no reason to be at those events. There would be nobody there for us to support. So this allows us to continue to support. And once the site, we'll start shipping mass quantities of these cells that you have pictured here mid-July, middle of next month. And once revenue picks up and we're able to fill orders from all of the people that are waiting on these deliveries right now, we're going to start doing monthly giveaways, and we'll start doing cash prizes at events. One of my goals was to try to have enough revenue generated from the DIY store to have some massive giveaway at our event coming up on the 13th of July. But it's really, it's been held up by a bunch of other new product releases that we've been working on. So you guys have probably seen all the AGM stuff we've reworked and re-released. So there's been a lot going on, and I'm pulling my hair out over it. So
it's okay. Pulling your hair out is allowed, because we do the same thing here.
Yeah.
Before we change the subject real quick, I did want to show that what's really cool about the site here, for those who haven't seen it, is you actually have empty battery cases as well. So if people want to put caps or whatever inside their own battery enclosures, they can. Like you said, you sell the ultra cap cells and the lithium cells too. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is, here recently, JP redid the Neo-Ho, and 84 cells of the LTOs, got 14 banks of 6 is what he had in there. Just a huge, check that out. That is just money shot right there. Wow. And
JT did a good job.
JT did an amazing job. And have you gotten feedback from Jonathan about how this has been performing versus the previous setup?
Well, before, he had our XS 40K SPL lithium batteries in there before. That was a lithium iron phosphate chemistry battery. So the energy density he had before per battery was much greater than this. But by switching to this technology, the only drawback that he has to kind of get used to is a lower operating voltage. So before, he was running a charging system at 18.25. So his voltage would swing down, under full load. After a while of doing demos, his voltage would swing down into the, high to low 15 range. If it started getting into the low 15s, he would start to back off. But that setup was much less capacity, less than half the amount of capacity that he has with this cell. So with this cell, he can still charge. The charging range is very wide with this cell too. You can charge anywhere from, 2 volts per cell all the way up to almost 3 volts per cell. 2.9 is our actual cutoff point that we recommend. So that allows him to get up there to, the 17 volt range. And, his operational range is still in the same, when he's under load and he's doing full power demos, he's still in the same range at his amplifier, but he can do it for a lot longer. And if he wanted to, he could go well into the 12 volt range and still have tons of power available. It really would just depend on the tuning of his system and how well his amplifiers respond to a swing that far. But so far, I mean, you've seen the events he's done. He, let's see, Triple Fest was before he put those in. But anyway, I know for sure he's done 2 back-to-back events, Slamology and then Scrape It. And I believe, wasn't there one other event he did right before Slam with this new bank in there? Maybe not. Anyway,
I think this was done for Slam, according to the video here. But that's an incredible setup there.
Yeah, it's he's added a lot of extra weight going this route, but it's not a daily driven vehicle, so it's a total of 560 amp hours. And I think JT and I added it up, and it was a couple 100 pounds total altogether. So, compared to what he had before, it's heavier, higher capacity, similar operating voltage, but his operational time is a lot further extended. Plus, if something happens like what happened, unfortunately, to his last battery bank, you have probably seen the story, but it went to a mechanic to work on the engine. They didn't realize that they had accidentally turned the alternator regulator wide open to 20 plus volts. And while they were doing work to the engine and letting the engine run for hours on end, they baked the batteries that were in there. So a lithium iron phosphate type battery, if you overcharge it, it is not very easy, but it's much easier to vent and heat up and go into a thermal runaway condition than a lithium titanate cell is. So, so far, it's the very first thing after the first half day of slam was over. I was beating him up all day. How hot are the batteries getting? How hot are they getting? He's like, I mean, they're room temperature as far as I can tell. So, before you would actually be able to, from a lithium iron phosphate, a 40 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery like that, you would be able to feel plenty of heat escaping through the terminal, and even on the top of the battery case, you would be able to feel significant heat. But that's one of the advantages of LTO. It doesn't heat up as much. And we have tons of experience with LTO. A lot of people don't realize that we were the first, not only to car audio, but to the aftermarket in general with a lithium titanate product. So the XS15K and the XS30K that we released in 2015, those have always been LTO. We just never told anybody what it was. We just put lithium ion on the case because we didn't want anybody to know what chemistry we were using. We had the upper hand for 3 years in a row, and nobody knew what we were using. It wasn't until after we released these cells that we started letting people know, okay, we've been using LTO for longer than anyone in the aftermarket. So the other ones, the SPL models, those were lithium iron phosphate because you can get a higher energy density in a smaller package. So it made more sense for the SPL guys. It was all about weight versus voltage under load. But now for people doing demos, you kind of throw some of that out the window for a more reliable setup, something you don't have to worry about failing or catching on fire. And the fire situation has been a big concern with a lot of the competition organizations and a lot of consumers. So we're trying to address that with this new product as well.
Yeah, and the DIY shop is awesome for that because before you guys started offering something like this, you had to get it from, a guy.
Yeah.
And not everybody's comfortable doing that.
Yeah. Well, and I can tell you that, anybody can go onto Alibaba and buy those cells and probably even buy them cheaper. But I can tell you that Yinlong specifically says and they have a policy that they don't support any marketplace business. So the cells you see on there are not supported. They're usually what the factory would tell us is that those are takeouts from a project, or they are product that was sold off for another purpose that found its way, whether that was stolen or some other way. It's definitely, there's no warranty support for anything that you buy through the marketplace like that. But the other part of it is that our product comes with a full 4-year factory-backed warranty. So that's one of the advantages that I wanted to bring is we have this factory relationship. So I wanted to be able to pass the advantage of that along to mainly to Team Excess Power. But I thought, why not just open it up to anybody and everybody, whether they are a loyal Excess Power customer or not. We can make them a loyal customer by offering them a product that they really want and help support our brand in the industry.
I think it's a very smart thing to do. It amazes me in some ways that an established company is looking forward is the same way you guys are. Because to me, this is what is going to be big in 5 years, and you guys are already doing it right now, and you're making
Right.
the path toward it. That's what's so cool. The question I have about the lithium, though, is what about the balancing and stuff? I know a lot of people go back and forth. You need to balance them. You need to do this. You need to do that. What is the importance of balancing those LTO cells?
I mean, we don't currently offer anything on the DIY store, but we are adding it. The reality is a larger cell like the 40, the 35, and the 30, even the 55 that we will have available in a couple weeks. If you have tight enough grouping of product, meaning you don't have one cell that's freshly made and another cell that's 2 years old and they have mismatched capacity and resistance, if you have a tight grouping of product and you do a good job of what some of the guys in the DIY forum refer to as mechanically balancing their bank, then you can get by in our audio side without really having to worry about balancing. And that's with a couple of assumptions. One of which is that you're not overcharging the bank, you're not completely depleting the battery pack to 0% state of charge. But anytime you're in a cycling application where you're fully charging, fully discharging, you're far more likely to come out of balance than in a bank that is pretty much kept within the same voltage range at all times. So if, for example, somebody buys a bank of our product and they install it and then they call us up and say, hey, I accidentally ran my battery bank dead, what should I do? Well, we would tell them to disassemble it, put them back together in parallel, charge them full in parallel, let them sit overnight in parallel, and then reconfigure them back into your original configuration in series or series parallel, however you had your setup. So, there are some tricks to minimize damage, but sometimes things just happen that are production related. So, out of, I don't know, however many thousand cells, you may get some that just don't pass. They passed QC somehow, but they still don't quite hold up. And if you get a cell like that just starts to go bad, then that can cause your bank to go out of balance. So there's some things that are just even if you had that happen and you had a balancing board, then you could potentially still see damage of the whole entire bank, because most balancing boards are not going to shuttle current that quickly anyway. So we will be on our DIY store probably before the end of next month. We will have our own proprietary version of a lithium iron phosphate balancer for 4 and 5S configurations, and then LTO balancers for 5, 6, and 7S configurations. And then we're also going to offer cap balancing boards. So for people who want to buy large banks of capacitors and they want a board, it's a nice piece that has our branding on it with a big, huge heat sink to help keep it cool. And it's got mounting options too. But probably the coolest thing overall is, if you've followed any of my posts in the DIY forums, you've probably heard me mention the exoskeleton system. I'm probably more excited about that single one product than I am anything else we have going on right now, because it's a really cool mounting and busing system for any cell. Actually, we've tailored it to start for the big round cells, but it allows you to mount the bank, completely insulate the bank, and bus it all together. And it's expandable in parallel and series, stackable as many layers high as you want to go with it. So I'm so excited to show it off. I wanted to try to have some stuff ready to show you guys, but it's there's still some things pending on it. But I hope to be selling the exoskeleton system in full by the start of the fourth quarter. We probably actually start taking orders next quarter, and we'll start showing it off within weeks. So, and the balancing system that we've developed for it is interchangeable for it as well. So I'm pretty excited for that to happen.
So I use right now the D1400s. I have 8 of them for my test bench, and I was looking at using some of the LTO cells as well. And now, since the voltage range is pretty similar between the LTO and the 14 volt AGM, I could probably use both of those together, right?
You could. They're different chemistry, so we never would. Random customer calls up and says, "Hey, I have an AGM battery and a lithium battery. Can I run them together?" Even with voltage matching, we would never say yes to that for long-term life cycle reasons. But technically, yes, you could. I try as much as I can when I'm going to put something in parallel to have matching capacity. And we do go against that occasionally. So one example would be, guy buys D3400 for under the hood and he buys a D3100 in the back. That's not matching capacity. You're putting the two batteries in two different total environments in that situation. So the life expectancy of those two products is never going to be identical anyway. One's exposed to much higher heat than the other. But when you're building one common bank, I would try as much as possible to match capacity and voltage precisely if possible. And something like your test bench, if you let the things sit together, they're not going to necessarily fight each other. One thing about the LTO is it's going to tend to have a higher resting voltage. So if you charge to 2.9 per cell and you charge your 14 volt AGM to 16.8 volts, you're going to notice that if you left them separated, the lithium will stay at what would be about 110% state of charge for the AGM. So it'll stay higher for longer. The AGM's rate of self-discharge will be a lot faster. So the thing you would notice if you paralleled them and did that is the LTO would hold the AGM up at above 100% state of charge for quite a while. And then eventually both banks would self-discharge at the rate of the AGM. So you would be taking energy unnecessarily out of the lithium bank over time. But it's not, for a test bench, it's not like you're going to, I mean, that LTO bank is going to have 20,000 cycle life. You'll put 5 replacements of AGM in there in the time it takes to use up the cycles in the LTO.
So what you're saying is go ahead and buy more cells.
What I would do if you want to expand the capabilities of your test bench is add LTO to it, and as your AGM starts to fall off, replace it with LTO. That would be the common sense thing to do value-wise.
Good tip. I like it. So we kind of skipped over a little bit, and I know our time is running short here. Some of your new offerings that you guys have on Excess Power. So did you want to go over some of that real quick about some of your new releases?
We probably have 15 or 20 pending press releases right now. And never in the history of the company did I ever think we'd be releasing this much new stuff at once, but there's a lot. A lot of batteries, we have gone back to increase the internal structure, and the whole goal is to reduce the internal resistance. So a lot of the things we've done is on a few batteries, we were able to squeeze a little bit thinner plate in there. There's a limit in which you can go. You can't go too thin or the plate will crumble as you start to try to assemble the battery. But and it would potentially create a potential for failure lifespan of the product. But we've changed out to a pure copper terminal with a silver plating on it now, which has reduced resistance even further. And we've massively increased the internal busing. Some batteries have seen as much as a 30 to 40% increase in internal busing size. So that was quite a bit of an undertaking. And some batteries you'll see as much as maybe a 5 or 10% increase in power. Some you may see we didn't necessarily increase power much, but we did decrease the internal resistance, which may have led to a little bit of extra a small increase in cranking power, but a little bit of extra capacity. And you'll see the weight is a little bit higher than it was because of that extra lead. And some of them we just made cosmetic changes, like adding our logos to the side to complete the line where it looks more consistent across the board. The new 47, 48, 49, and the new 65 will start shipping Friday or Monday, and they came out far better than my expectation. I mean, they're going to be some of our most popular batteries now. So historically for car audio guys, we sold more 31s and 34s than anything. But now that these direct fit batteries are so much more tailored to what our guys want, they're going to be able to buy the one that actually fits their car. So we'll start to see an increase in sales of some of those direct fit models. We released a huge line of billet copper and aluminum parts for terminals, and probably the development is completely done, but we've also revamped our whole entire billet mount off. So we took our billet mounts and shaved them down where they're going to be less expensive and less weight, and they're pretty cool looking too. I'm a real big fan of the new look of the mounting system, and they'll be affordable to the point where a lot of people will buy them now. Before, it was not very some of those billet kits came out to 160 or 70 bucks, and a guy that's spending a couple $100 for a battery you'd have a hard time talking them into that much of an expense for a mount for it. But Man, we released the 90 amp power supply. That thing is a beast. It's if you've ever seen an incriminator 80.1, it's about the size of one of those. It's massive. It's powerful too.
So, now that we're talking about AGM, can you kind of give the guys, who is the AGM for? Who's the lithium for? Do you kind of got a person in mind you're trying to sell one or the other to?
If a customer calls and they ask which one they should use, we kind of ask a bunch of questions first. And it really comes down to the user's, what the user is looking for. So right now, if a customer called the main excess power line, we wouldn't necessarily direct them to the DIY store. It's kind of like a customer of excess power, the DIY store is. So, however, if a customer calls and that's exactly what they need and that's the only thing that would work for them, then we would direct them at that time. But we would typically try to point them in the direction of the appropriate AGM product. But if they're all about lithium and that's what they want, then and it fits for what they need. A lot of times if a customer just needs reliability and capacity and a more simple installation, AGM is going to suit that customer a lot of times, and especially if they're looking for something for a particular fitment. With the exoskeleton system we have coming for the loose cells, that will open us up to offering, when the exoskeleton system is available, that whole assembled product will be available through the dealer network at an appropriate price for dealers to sell it and make money. So it'll be the same situation as with our Superbank series and our loose caps. So now you'll have a situation where DIY guys can go in and buy the exoskeleton system parts, and they can buy the cells. They can put it all together themselves. They can invest their own time and energy and labor, and they can make sure their own cells are balanced. But if a guy doesn't have any interest in doing all that, he can just go to Crutchfield or to Summit Racing or to Down for Sound or wherever and just buy it already assembled in a box. You put 2 terminals on it and you're done. That's still not going to work well for people who want a direct fit product or something to go under the hood. But there's still a huge market for both the AGM product and a lithium. Even we released 22 new lithium SKUs this year as well. We've been collecting orders for those. That's a lithium iron phosphate offering, and the car audio guys really don't pay much attention to it because it's listed under our racing and power sports lines. But some of that stuff would work great for car audio guys too. But I don't expect a lot of those guys will buy it for that purpose. That stuff is really meant for racing applications. But and those items will start shipping in early September, somewhere around in there.
Lots of cool stuff. Well, man, this time has flown by. I have so many more questions for you, but I'm respecting your time here. We'll have to have you some other time when things calm down, maybe a little bit if they do, and we'll hit you up with some more questions. I did want to show everybody real quick. This is actually on the Excess Power page, but a lot of people may not know somebody like Scottie, that runs Excess Power. His resume, I mean, if you look at this, that's pretty impressive. I mean, goes all the way back to 99 Mecha World Champion, first super street vehicle to reach 167 dB, 168 dB, just street cred like crazy. So it's very impressive that, somebody who you can really tell who's passionate about car audio is running a company that's related to car audio, because there's so many times we're thinking people are just in this for the money. People are in this to make a quick buck and they're not passionate about it. And this shows, that you went into debt, trying to build up your system. So you were into it way back then, but we appreciate your time and talking about the lithium, and wow, this is so cool. There's
thank you, man.
Exciting things.
Yeah, I still resist the urge to build an SPL car. I want to so bad. People poke me all the time to do it, but that would take away all my precious time with my family. So I'm resisting it for that reason. but I would love to do that again. One of these days I'll retire from business and I'll just build SPL again.
There you go. That sounds awesome. Well, those who are listening to this on the podcast, make sure that you check us out on youtube.com/12etalk, because if you can catch us live, you can actually ask questions, and we stick around until after the show to answer the questions. But we had a few people send us super chats today, and that's helped. I've got a new camera you guys can probably see here and tell that my video quality is a little bit better. Thanks to the super chats. I want to give some shout outs here for Jason Zemer, Car Audio Guy, Legends of Car Audio, Rick Quattlebaum, CT Sounds, John Olds, Drew Luther, Joaquin Juarez. Thank you guys for helping us out here during the show and helping us to buy equipment to do the show. And Scottie, thank you so much for your time today. I don't know, Rob, did you have any other quick questions for Scottie before you end the podcast?
No, I think we got it all wrapped up. We know everything about lithium and AGM, and there's nothing new to learn.
Wow.
No, that's definitely not what to take away from this.
No, I
No.
still had several questions we didn't get to, but that's cool.
Yeah.
We'll have you on again sometime, Scottie. And again, thanks for your time. Thanks everybody for watching. Make sure you check us out, 12 Volt Talk on Spotify, Google Play, and Apple Podcast. Thanks as always for watching. Until next time, 12 Volt Talk out.
Bye. Later.
All right, man. Wow, that was cool.
That was cool.
That was man, there was just so much stuff about the lithium that I wanted to get into, but I didn't want to pull you so far away from your core product. But I mean, I kind of feel like you're passionate about the lithium stuff too, because you're into it so much with the DIY guys, and you see, I mean, like you're right, that group's got over 10,000 members, and it's not even that old. I don't think it's only like a couple months old.
No. Yeah, and it literally will make massive leaps sometimes, and it just overnight it seems like there's another 1,000 new members. It's like, okay, well, this is getting enough attention now where it will be a worthwhile effort to kind of share, and I get enjoyment out of it too. It's like, it's not. There's a little bit of selfishness in there too, because I enjoy having things that these guys can use. It's like, I wish back in the day that there would have been somebody that had access to something like this that could have shared it, and I guess thinking back to the story I was telling, Dominic kind of played a little bit of that role of taking something that wasn't readily available and introducing it to me, but it really was not the product to be using, but I made it work anyway. But yeah, I mean, I get enjoyment out of seeing how it grows and changes and seeing the trends. And if we can be a part of it, then that's super cool. If it goes a different direction and Excess Power doesn't end up having any involvement in it, then that's cool too. I mean, it's not like there's no concern that the DIY trend would have a negative impact on our ability to conduct business. And we have more business at times than we can handle. So I have seen a couple of snarky comments from members in there to say, oh man, they must be struggling if they're worrying about this little piddly DIY network. But it's not about that at all. It's about participating and being engaged with potential customers, and a lot of times existing customers. That's one of the really cool things, is there's a bunch of people that have contacted me already that they're using some DIY thing that maybe I've never even heard of, but they also still use Excess Power. So I'm like, this is cool. This is a way to keep involved with our customers, and maybe they might not buy anything battery related from me, but they may still buy our cable, or they might buy our accessories or chargers or something along those lines. So yeah, it's been a fun few months. It's been a long time in planning. I've kind of been watching the DIY community for what seems like a year or more. Probably there was only 10 people there at first. But yeah, it's a fun thing. I like it.
Yeah, and I apologize for not mentioning the Excess Power show. You did touch on it.
Yeah.
I will put the link in the description, the video description below, so people can go to the Facebook page to find out more about that. And I know that Ed Lester sent me a message a while back and said he was going to go, and I think he's going to try to come by here maybe on his way back to Pennsylvania. I'm in North Carolina, but I'm on the eastern side of North Carolina, so I will try to make it to that show. I'm just not sure that I'll be able to. We have a tight video schedule here, trying to get videos done every week while working full time and all that. You understand how that goes, I'm sure. But yeah, if I can make it, I definitely will. I'd love to go.
Yeah, it'll be a good show, and we treat it as an open house. So, we don't just open the doors and allow anybody to walk through the offices, but, there's plenty of time at an event like that for, special tours and stuff like that. We keep the back open and people come in, and, we have tons of B stock stuff sitting out for, half off. And it's like, if you need anything, it's a good time to come get it for sure. So it's a fun time. Last year, I can't remember how many competitors we had, but I know we gave away 160 trophies. So I don't know if we gave like 3 trophies to each person or what, but it was fairly well attended.
That's cool. I'm scrolling through the comments real quick. If you guys have any quick questions for Scottie, just post them again. There's been a lot.
We got the Third Era has one.
Go ahead.
He asks, what battery does Scottie recommend for a Jeep Power Wheel with a 1,000 watt setup?
A Power Wheel?
Weight is key, he says.
If the thing is, if you used one of those LTO banks, which would be a good option. I mean, you're talking about $360. So it's, equivalent in price to what the old price of the D3100 used to be. And I mean, you're talking about 80 pounds there. The Power Wheel would be popping a wheelie with that thing in there. So if you used a bank of those, if the amplifier can handle it, it would be ideal to charge it with a 14-volt battery charger to get the most out of it. Because a 40 amp hour bank, for example, if you're only charging at 13.8 roughly, you're not going to get the full 40 amp hours of capacity. So the play time would be limited for that. But if you're able to charge all the way up to 16.8 and the electronics, I know the Power Wheel drivetrain will handle it and love it. That thing will be, 2/3 faster than it was from the factory, but you would get more usable capacity out of it too. So that DIY stuff would be a good option for weight savings and affordable.
So you can burn wheels, pop wheelies, and save weight. So it's win-win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah, possibly get your kid into a wreck with the souped up Power Wheel.
I've put there's a whole community of guys that soup those things up, and a lot of people try to run them on 24 volts, but those motors won't hold up to that. But the 16 volts, I've seen people run 16 volt batteries on those things before, and it's quite a bit of difference. I put in my daughter's little Barbie Beetle, I put a 925 in there, and it just had a little bitty tiny generic AGM battery in it from the factory, and they were both 12 volt batteries, but that 925 was so much more power, it stripped the gears out of the wheel. She was driving the wheels off that thing until it broke. So, but yeah, that would be a good option for that guy.
All right.
If he were looking at another one of our previous lithium versions to get that same amount of capacity, would have been double the cost, if not triple. So it was a very affordable option and easy to set up too. It's, as of what we have on the site right now, the only thing he would need in addition is connectors to put it together. And probably within a couple weeks, we'll have the link bars on there for the lithium cells as well.
So you mentioned earlier, Scottie, about the lithium iron phosphate. Are you going to do those cells too, or not on the DIY site?
On the site, I doubt we'll end up putting an LFP product on there. There would be some liability involved that I really don't want to open myself up to. It's more finicky, with a smaller cell, and we have a wide variety of small cells that we use for all kinds of different applications, but we know what we're doing when we make battery packs. And if you put a product out there and someone doesn't know what they're doing, then they're going to end up wasting their money, which if you follow the DIY community right now, you see a lot of, guys are like, I'm going to try this. And they're doing it with the knowledge of it may not work. But if a company like Excess Power puts a product on there and somebody buys it and they break it because they don't know what they're doing, and they're going to turn back around to us and say, you shouldn't have sold that to us, so I'm going to try to avoid that hassle and headache for now.
That makes sense. 100% sense.
So
That's kind of what I wondered about offering the lithium cells anyway. I know the LTO cells, they like cut them with a hacksaw and shoot them with a gun and drill them.
Yep.
And they're just super safe.
Yep.
They won't explode or anything. But I know
Yep.
a lot of the other cells are not quite so forgiving.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for liability. And we've been doing lithium batteries since our first release into the market was 2007. And fortunately, since then, we've never had a reported incident. We've had, in the time we've been doing batteries, we've actually had more claims of fire-related damage from AGM customers, and every one of them has been substantiated by some other cause. It's you just an AGM battery doesn't catch on fire for no reason. If it does, it's because someone did something very wrong, or there was another reason for the fire, and the battery just was identified as a component in that thing that got a fire. And we end up getting calls sometimes. Somebody last weekend had a race car incident, and the car flipped over, burst into flames, and the fire investigator called us for the ingredients that we use in our acid, because he was thinking the acid in the battery is what caused this flame, but it was definitely not that, I can assure you. The liquid electrolyte in an AGM battery is flammable, but in an AGM battery, especially ours, they're considered dry charged batteries. There's such a small amount. You can literally turn it upside down and drill a hole in it with a drill, and you may get drips, tiny little thimbles full of acid out. You're not going to get a spill such that it causes a massive fire or something. So
yeah, and we blow up AGM cells all the time at work, and they don't catch on fire. Not yet.
Right.
So
yeah. I mean,
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you try hard enough, you can make anything dangerous. But our thought process with the cylindrical cells are, they take a lot of abuse, and our customers can be abusive. So it's kind of a good match. So
there was one question about the charge of the lithium. Let's see. Joaquin says, would I have to charge my lithiums on a regular basis if I never stress them or drain them? For example, 370 amp alternator with a 3K system with lithium. So no. I think to clarify, you mentioned it before, but we just want people to understand that you don't really want to mix your AGMs and your LTOs. So if you're going to go LTO, you just need to just go LTO. And they're kind of temperature sensitive too, right? So you want to keep them inside the vehicle, not in the engine compartment.
Yeah, I mean our LTO cells have about the same operating temperature range as our AGM batteries do. Batteries in general just don't like heat. Capacitors don't either. I mean, our capacitors have a 1 million cycle life rating, but if you operate them at the top end of their operating temperature range, you're going to see less than that. And that's the case with AGM, lithium, or whatever. But you could operate the LTO, a pack of LTO cells in 130, 140 degree atmosphere, and you're not going to likely have a heat-related premature failure, but you could potentially cause it to not last as long. But again, that thing has a 20,000 cycle life. You probably will not be into stereo anymore when that thing stops working. So I wouldn't stress about, a lot of people will ask, hey, I live in Texas or Florida. Am I going to, have an issue with this lithium battery? But as long as you're reasonable about it, I mean, don't install it in an engine compartment, literally right butted up against the radiator. I mean, that's not going to be good for any battery, even the flooded battery the car came with won't last long in a situation like that. But in that guy's the described stereo system, if he has a lithium battery of medium capacity and only 3,000 watts and a 300 and some odd amp alternator, under normal circumstances, I would say that guy probably doesn't even need a charger. You don't have to maintain lithium like you do lead acid. So if you've charged your battery and it's resting at what is considered its full voltage, it's probably going to stay there unless you have a drain on it. And again, it doesn't need to be maintained. But again, you could have, if like how I was when I was in college, I would get in my car, crank it wide open from the time I sat in the seat until the time I got out. And there was no chance in hell the alternator was ever going to catch up to that. So in that situation, you probably would be well served to have a charger on it every now and then just to keep it full. But one of the other advantages with lithium, whether it's lithium iron phosphate or LTO or NMC or any of the other chemistries, it's not as detrimental to their life to not keep them charged all the time. And an AGM battery, it really makes a difference in how long your battery lasts based on how well you keep it charged. So if you keep an AGM battery topped off all the time, you're going to get far better luck out of it than, lithium. If it sits at 30% discharged, it's not going to have as significant of an impact on the life of the battery as the AGM version of it would.
Cool.
So,
Well, Scottie, we have taken up enough of your time tonight. We greatly appreciate you joining us here and everybody in the chat room for hanging out with us as well. Ed in there, car audio guy, CT Sounds, a bunch of people joining us in the chat room and hanging out with us. And again, thanks, Scottie, for your time. And,
thank you, guys.
Thanks for everything you do for the car audio industry as well. I love to stand behind a company that is so passionate about what they do and the community as well. It's obvious that your involvement here shows that you're passionate about community. So thanks again for that.
I appreciate the recognition.
Yeah,
for sure.
All right.
Sometimes it feels like people don't pay attention, so I'm glad somebody
you're up on the pedestal, man. We have a lot of respect for you and everything that you've done and everything you're continuing to do. So thanks for that. And everybody, we will see you next week. Rob?
All right, thanks.
Later.
See ya.